I'm sitting at my computer, soaking wet in the clothes I've been wearing all evening. I want to get this all down while I can still remember it perfectly. I say that like I'll ever be able to forget it. I was raised Baptist. I've lived in the Deep South for most of my life, and it was normal to be religious, even zealously so. I went to the usual activities: Bible vacation school, church camp, church 3 nights a week, sermons on Sundays, and until I went to college, I was pretty much a regular churchgoer. Once I left for college, kind of getting out of that environment, I kind of fell off, though. Suddenly, passing classes was a little more important than keeping up with my spiritual health. Suddenly, parties and dating were more important than my relationship with God. So I blinked one day and realized it had been almost 15 years since I'd been to church, and I thought I might like to experience it again. A quick Google search showed me a church in my area that wasn't too far out of town and seemed like it'd be a good fit for me. I saw from their community Facebook page that they were having an event on Saturday. Just a meet and greet for new members, bring a covered dish for the potluck, with a spiritual event to follow where new members could get baptized and join the church. I didn't have anything going on Saturday, so I thought that sounded pretty good. I made a macaroni casserole, one of the few things I actually knew how to make, and on Saturday, I sat at about 3 p.m. in my best church clothes. As I pulled up outside the church, I was worried that I might be a little underdressed in my button-up and work slacks. People were going in, men in suits, crisp white shirts, ladies in long dresses, and kids in the sort of Sunday school clothes I was used to seeing at different churches. Made me think there might be a dress code. I was new, though, and I figured that if I wasn't within that dress code, they'd let me know. So I took my dish and headed for the fellowship hall that was set off beside the church. I walked in the side door to a very familiar scene. The welcome was immediate and warm. A woman came to take my dish to the table as the pastor came to introduce himself as Pastor Marshall. I had expected a firm handshake and, to be left alone to mingle, but the pastor took me to each of the little groups there and introduced me to his congregation. I met his deacons, their families, the aldermen and their wives, the treasurer, the underpastors, and about 24 other families. I was escorted to the food table by some of the deacons and told which dishes were the best and which ones were best avoided. Miss Liz is a good woman, but there's quite a few eggshells in her dressing. And which had been made by eligible ladies of the church. Miss Conroy's daughter's about your age and makes a great pecan pie. I was spirited away to a table where I was bombarded with questions and anecdotes and given the usual church gossip. It was honestly a little like being home again. The church I'd belonged to in my childhood was very tight-knit, and as the kids ran around and the adults talked and laughed quietly, I felt a sense of homecoming wash over me. As the food was eaten and the plates were thrown away, we all moved into the worship hall for service. I sat on the front row with the 4 or 5 other new faces, and as Pastor Marshall mounted the pulpit, I couldn't help but smile. I felt a warmth in me, and I was already thinking about how I would have to change my schedule so I could come on Sundays and Wednesdays. As he laid out a sermon on acceptance and forgiveness, I began to reflect on my life here. It's hard not to when you've found somewhere you intend to stay for a while. In my mind, I would find fulfillment in the church, just like I had as a kid. I'd meet a nice girl, raise a family, grow old within the community, where they would support me and my little ones. I know it sounds a little silly, but we all know the places that our mind goes during times like this. I see we have some new faces on the front bench tonight. Would any of you like to join our church and get baptized tonight? I stood up like a coal had been lit under me. I felt moved in a way that I never had to go to the altar, to renew my vows to God, and be washed clean in the baptismal font. The pastor smiled as he waved me up, and I had to stop myself from sprinting up the stairs. I was excited. I was in such a hurry to be part of this. I had no idea what I was in for. The pastor had me recite the affirmation, the renewal of my promise to God, and when he turned to indicate the space behind the pulpit, I realized they had an indoor baptismal pool. I'd never seen one of those before. We always did our baptisms in a nearby creek, but as he took my hand and led me towards it, I realized he meant to baptize me fully clothed. I fished the things out of my pocket that I didn't want to get wet, my phone, my keys, my wallet, etc., and set them on the stairs before stepping into the slightly warm water. I wouldn't normally have agreed to let my clothes get wet. I don't like being in wet clothes as a rule, but I was operating in a daze, and when he knelt to dip me, I felt my knees bending as I went down as well. I baptize you in the name of the Father, His Son, and the Holy Spirit. Good luck. I opened my mouth to ask why I would need luck, but as he dipped me back, my mouth was filled with water, and I was enveloped in the warm embrace of the pool. It didn't have the acrid smell of chlorine like I had thought it would. It was salty, actually, and that took me by surprise. I lay on my back beneath the water, waiting to be pulled back up, and when I opened my eyes, I realized that the hand was gone, and I was alone in the depths of the pool. The pool was suddenly deeper than I remembered it. The surface glimmered miles above me. The bottom was a shadowy depth beneath me, and I was floating in the depths like a diver. I started to panic, thinking I would drown, but the longer I sat beneath, the less I was worried. I was floating in the placid space, hovering in the placental moment, and I felt utterly at peace with the world and everything within it. I didn't notice that something was getting closer to me until it was almost too late. It began as a chill in the water, something that chased away the warmth of that pool. I opened an eye, looking to the far side, and saw a shadow rising from the distance. It was small at first, a black cloud that grew as it floated closer, but it grew wider as it came towards me. It was, I don't know. It was like something you see from the depths when you're still in the part of the water where the light can reach you. It was something I was afraid would take hold of me and drag me into the murk where I would be lost. Whatever it was, it filled me with a dread that I had never known before. As it continued to draw closer, I thought it might be a whale. I had thought at first that it might be a bank of darkness, but as it grew closer, I could see that the blackness was just how it looked. It seemed to exist inside its own fog of murk, and what I could see wasn't terribly pleasant. Its skin was gray, pebbly like a stony shore, and it appeared scaled or maybe ridged. Its eyes were huge, and the closer it got, the smaller I felt. It was massive, beyond the description of size or dimensions, and the closer it got, the less I wanted to be the focus of that attention. This must be what an ant felt like as it stood on a finger of a human, what an insect felt like before the frog devours it, and I could feel my whole body vibrating under the strain of its continued existence. It seemed to lean closer as it came up before me, our bodies inches from each other, and when it spoke, I could feel it in my bones. "Welcome back, my child." It reached out a massive finger, the print on the end looking like the indicators on a map. Even the end of that finger was bigger than my whole body, and it was like someone reaching out with a building to touch me. I closed my eyes, feeling it would obliterate me with that massive digit. But when it came into contact with my forehead, I was enveloped in a blinding light that burned me to a cinder. I came up gasping and thrashing from the depths, the pastor catching me as the congregation cheered. As their applause rose to envelop me, I looked down at the pool, expecting to see myself floating or standing on the edge of a lip, but the whole baptismal font was only about 2 feet deep. Standing up, I Could see the water wasn't even over my knees. The pastor looked up, still bent and kneeling at the bottom of the pool, and his expression was resplendent. Did he know what would happen? Did anything happen while I was floating in that abyss? The longer I stared at him, the longer I came to believe that he had known what would happen, and his eyes seemed to be trying to calm me as he stood and embraced me as a brother. As he did, I heard him whisper into my ear to be easy. "Steady on, son, steady on. It's a little jarring at first, but it's all over now. Rejoice in the light, and be well." When I looked at him again, I could see a deeper understanding in his eyes, something I didn't know how I had missed before. When I looked out across the congregation, it was a look I saw mirrored in them as well. I was speechless, unsure of what to do, and when he led me out of the pool, it was all I could do not to break into a run. He offered me a towel, letting me stand shivering beside the pool as he asked the others if they wanted to come up. When the second man approached, seeming more hesitant than I had been, I grabbed my things and snuck out the choir entrance that led to the fellowship hall. It was empty now, the whole space covered in semi-shadow, and within that shadow, I could feel the regard of whatever had spoken to me in the depths. The next thing I knew, I was in my car and driving too fast from him. It was a miracle that I didn't get pulled over, though I briefly wondered who I had to thank for that. As I sit here now, my shaking has nothing to do with the cold. If this was the God of my father, the God I've been praying to all my life, then I think I'd rather be an atheist. Even as I sit here now, I can still imagine floating in that void as the ancient creature regards me kindly, its mind brushing against my own, and the dread threatening to overtake me again. I'd pray for oblivion, but I know what's waiting there for me now. Well, Miss Lee, this treatment is experimental, but we feel it will improve your condition. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can schedule you for the first of the week. The doctor tapped the form like a used car salesman trying to sell a sports car with no engine. The kind of salesman who thinks you're too stupid to look under the hood and too desperate to believe the deal is anything but genuine. That was the beginning of the end of my life. My name is Pandora Lee, and this is my story. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a debilitating bone disease, the kind that causes your bones to be very weak. My doctor sent me to a specialist, and after running some tests and running up a small fortune in bills, he wanted to try an experimental treatment to harden my bones. I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But could I really afford to be in my condition? The following week, I arrived for my first treatment. The waiting room was the same bland area I'd seen 1,000 times. The sort of forgettable facade that hides the work that goes on beyond that unassuming blue door, between the show floor and the butcher's shop. Children moved beads along a wire maze, as parents and patients looked through magazines that had been current about 10 years ago. The smiling face of President Obama looked up from a table, he and Martha Stewart sharing space with Better Homes and Gardens and Highlights magazine. The magazines were only slightly more interesting than the paperwork on the clipboard I was muddling through, but I tried my best to ignore them. "Miss Lee, we're ready for you," a young blonde-haired woman in scrubs called to me, smiling brightly as she led me through the oddly dark blue door and into a hallway of the same color. Despite the buzzing overhead lights, the paint scheme made the whole place look shadowy, and I shuddered as she led me to a little room farther down. She showed me to a small, sterile room, with only a gurney and an IV stand to break up the emptiness. The room was blessedly brighter, a kind of eggshell white that verged on eye-watering, and I stepped inside and handed her the clipboard. "Please take a seat and get comfortable, Miss Lee. The doctor will be here very shortly." As I lay there waiting, the clean white paper crinkling under me, I had a gut feeling that this was a bad idea. I chalked it up to nerves, though. It was just another exam, just another series of tests. Just another meeting that would end predictably. I should have listened to my gut. As the doctor walked in, he smiled his best Crest Kid smile, and I imagined I could see spit stains on his teeth. I wish I could tell you that he was an ugly little man, some goblin who scared me or made me wish a nurse had stayed to observe our interactions, but he was actually very plain-looking. Thinking back now, I can't tell you anything about him, other than his big grin and his neat little mustache. It might have been easier if he were a monster, but I guess life is rarely easy. Well, Miss Lee, as you know, this is still experimental. It's in the early trial phases. You'd honestly be one of our first human trials for the treatment, but we feel you are the perfect candidate. I stared at him blankly, unsure whether he expected me to be flattered or break out into applause. He looked uncomfortable, clearly not getting the response he was expecting. Calling the pretty blonde nurse from earlier, he asked her to strap me down and told me to relax. The straps were scratchy, the clasps sitting cold against my arm, and I found it hard not to squirm as she slid the IV in. The doctor reached into the hall and wheeled out a large metal canister. It looked like a fire extinguisher, the old kind with a hand crank, except for the face mask on the end, which is undoubtedly going over my face. He must have noticed my apprehension, because the too big grin made a return appearance. "Don't worry, Miss Lee. It's all very safe." He placed the mask over my face, the smell of cleaner mixing with something sickly sweet and acidic. "Breathe deep," he prompted, and I took my first breath, his voice sounding as if it were coming to me from the lip of a deep hole. "You'll wake up in no time." Then it all went black, my last memory being the stuff I breathed in tasting like the smell of cleaner my mother had always used when I was young. Then I didn't think about anything for a while. I was floating for a while, my body as light as a feather, and I could have gladly floated in that void forever. When I dropped back into my body, however, it was worse than any falling dream I'd ever had. I opened my eyes and looked around frantically, my body still splayed across the gurney as the canister pumped whatever was in the tank into my lungs. I felt a surge of pain rip through my whole body, and I jerked fitfully against the restraints. The scream ripped up my lungs, the gas clouding my mouth as I choked on my anguish. The nurse ran in, trying to calm me to no avail. "Calm down, Miss Lee. We don't want you to damage your bones while the treatment is doing its job. The pain is only temporary. The doctor will be in to give you something for it and explain everything." Her words did nothing for the pain that drilled into my bones, and after what seemed like hours, the doctor finally came in. He had a needle in his hand, the tip slid easily into the IV, and he filled the saline bag with something. It was cold, the liquid flowing in like ice, but the relief was immediate. I lay back gasping, the sudden lack of pain almost as jarring as the pain had been, and the big smile hovered over me like a specter. "The first treatment is always the most painful, but it seems to be a success so far. You might have some joint stiffness for a few days, but that's to be expected, as the treatment hardens your bones." As the gas hissed and the ice brought sweet relief to my inflamed bones, I lay there drinking in grateful lungs of air. The lack of pain was hard to quantify, but I became aware over time that it wasn't just the sudden burning that had gone away. The everyday pain I had gotten used to, the inflamed joints and the deep ache of weakened bones, was also gone. It was like someone had flipped a switch in me, and suddenly I was exactly like I'd been before. This may seem like a small thing, but when you've lived with the pain, made it a day-to-day part of your life, its absence is like a physical loss. It was like a kid who's had his tooth pulled, his tongue prodding at the vacancy where something solid had been before. When he spoke, I had to shake myself back to reality to ask him to repeat himself. "We will see you in 2 weeks for your next treatment. The nurse will give you a prescription when you leave. Take it twice a day in order to keep your body from rejecting the treatment. Understand?" I nodded, still a little dazed, and agreed to take the pills. I made another appointment with the similarly pretty brunette and took the nondescript little bag she handed me. She smiled, saying they would see me in 2 weeks, and I headed home. As I drove home, I expected the pain to rear its head again with every press of a pedal or turn of the wheel. The pain had become like a swarm of gnats, ever present and buzzing. You never got used to it, but you became accustomed to it. It's never comfortable, but you look forward to the times when it isn't there. Now, it was just gone. I was driving with nary a pain or a wince, something I hadn't done in years. I should have been happy, but I kept waiting for it to disappear. Maybe that made me a pessimist, but I don't care. When you live like this long enough, you constantly wait for the other shoe to drop. I walked into my house, my bones still feeling like nothing so much as normal bones, and took the pills out of the bag. Reading over the label for side effects or warnings, I found nothing but the instructions on the outside. No name, no ingredients, no warnings, just 8 words in bold font. Take 1 pill, with food, twice a day. I opened the bottle and let a few of the pills roll onto my palm. They were white and blue gel capsules, the contents looking like nothing so much as the sugar on top of the snow caps my husband ate at the movies. As they sat in my hand, I noticed that they were oddly cold to the touch, and the feeling reminded me of the way the liquid had felt as it entered my IV. When they didn't immediately appear dangerous or try to bite me, I let them tumble back into the bottle and closed the lid. I set a reminder on my phone for 7 a.m. and started fixing dinner. When I went to bed that night, I had already forgotten about them, but as I pulled the blankets up around myself, I felt a sudden chill arrow through me. It should have raised a sort of red flag, but I was still riding the high of moving about my home without any of the pain from earlier that day. A few hours later, though, I was awoken by an icy chill going through my body, followed by an intense ache in my joints. As I tried to get up, I felt every bone in my body tighten. It was almost impossible to walk, but after a few minutes, it eased up, and I was able to make it to the bathroom. I figured this was just a side effect of the stiffness the doctor was talking about. And after a warm bath, some of the pain had abated. With some of my mobility returned, I shuffled back to bed, hoping to sleep off the pain until it was time for my first dose of medication. The next day, the pain of the night before was a fleeting memory, and I took my first pill and started getting ready for my day. It usually took me several hours to get my legs to cooperate enough to make breakfast, but today I moved about my kitchen the way I hadn't in years. My joints felt fluid, my bones were as forgettable as they should be, and when I woke my husband up for work at 10, he looked at me a little shocked to find breakfast already on the table, and the kitchen dishes cleaned and put away. "Wow, those treatments really did the trick," he said, taking my hands in his big calloused ones, intent on kissing them. He dropped them in surprise as a shudder ran through him. "Geez, babe, your hands are so cold." There was worry on his face, but I waved his worries away and told him it was nothing. "It's just a side effect of the treatment. I'm fine, sweetie." Deep down, though, I was worried. I should have called the doctor's office right then and there and told them about the side effects. After the weirdness that had happened the night before, I should have been more concerned, but it all comes back to one thing. Despite the stiffness, despite the cold hands, despite the next 2 weeks where sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and hobbled into a warm bath, the intense pain in my bones was all but a distant memory. I would have given anything to be done with the pain like that, and it turned out the cost was more than I could have known. 2 weeks later, I arrived at my next appointment. I was curious to see if it hurt the same way it had the time before, but my reasons for going were twofold. I had taken the last of my pills that morning, and I knew that I would need more if I wanted to maintain this lack of joint pain. So I smiled at the nurse, let them strap me down again, let them slide the needle into my arm, and breathed in the gas like the good doctor told me to. The treatment was performed the same as the first, but I gritted my teeth through the pain as I waited for him to inject my IV with that sweet icy liquid as the gas did its work. As the straps slid off, I nodded through the closing instructions and shuffled up to the desk to make my appointment and get my pills. I moved as if in a dream, my body feeling strangely heavy as I climbed into my car and drove home. I jerked awake in my driveway, unsure how I had arrived home. I had never fallen asleep at the wheel, much less sleep drove home, and the thought made me shiver. I grabbed my prescription and headed inside, wanting to get as far from the vehicle as possible at that moment. I thought about starting dinner as I trudged in, but decided to take a nap instead. It was early still, only mid-afternoon, but I was suddenly exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open, and as I slid into bed wearing the same clothes I'd left the house in, I thought I was settling in for nothing but a couple hours of rest. 10 hours later, I shuddered awake into total darkness as an arctic chill shot through my nerve endings. It was worse than it had ever been, worse than any time before it, and as I tried to climb out of bed, my legs froze up and sent me spilling to the floor. I lay there, unable to bend my legs or arms, only able to pull them towards me like palsied claws. I was overjoyed when I heard my husband's soft snores from the bed beside me. He would help me. He would get me to the hospital. He could get me into a warm bath, and I opened my mouth to scream his name. My lips trembled as I prepared to cry out for him, but no sound escaped my chilly maw. I gasped weakly, his name lost amongst the short barks of sound, while he slept peacefully a few feet away. I lay there with tears of fear dripping down my face, certain that he would wake up the next morning to find me dead. I almost expected to see them freeze against my cheeks, but they did little more than pool beneath my head and wet the side of my face. I spent that night drifting in and out of my new painful existence. It felt like I lay there for weeks, listening to the content snores of my spouse as my body was racked with freezing chills. I thought I would die again and again, and as the sun began to rise, I almost wished for it. The colder I became, the less the shivers seemed to blow through me. I still felt them, but my body had stopped responding. I was powerless to move, incapable of doing much besides watching the sunrise and the day begin. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when my husband yelled my name, my eyes were startled open. What the hell is this? But he seemed to lose his words as he stood over me. I mouthed at him, asking him to help me, but he looked unsure. I don't know how. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but instead he turned to my vanity and fetched a small hand mirror. I looked back at myself, not sure it was me for a moment. I was looking at a perfect china doll as she lay curled up on the floor. Her skin was a perfect alabaster, broken only by the slight spider cracks that ran through it. As I watched, another chill coursed through me, and I saw the cracks lengthen as my fragile form tried to shiver. I wanted to cry, but I had no tears left. Instead, I told him to put the phone next to me and put it on text-to-speech. I wanted him to understand, wanted to explain how this had happened, while I could still explain anything. He did as I asked, saying he would go get help, but I don't think he'll be back in time. It took a surprisingly short time to lay it all out, but I can feel the change beginning to affect my face now. My blinks are becoming slower and slower, and my throat's beginning to tighten as it stiffens like my skin. My lips have started to flake as I speak, the cracks in my arms likely running through the lips my husband loved to kiss. I'll be nothing but a beautiful statue soon, a curiosity piece for people to speculate over. But with the time I have left, I want people to understand how I came to this point. I don't know if it was the treatment or the pills, maybe it was both, but it doesn't appear to be ready for human trials. If they ask you to sign your life away as I did, make sure you know what you're agreeing to. The short respite from pain wasn't worth the hell I found myself in now. It's getting hard to breathe now. My lungs are laboring to pull in breath, and I can feel the same shivering running through them with every gasping pull. My eyes are fixed forward, my fingers forever locked together, and I feel that every word may be my last. If you make it home, Jason, know that I love you, and I'm sorry that this is where we must part. You'll have to bear with me while I tell you my story. So much of it is written from the hazy recollections of someone who was in captivity. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't abused in the traditional sense. I was well kept, I was well fed, and I really wanted for nothing, except my freedom. It all started one day when I visited a new therapist. Dr. McAllister had been recommended by a friend of mine. He said he was very good, and he'd helped him get through a lot of issues that he had with his mother and discover some things about his sexuality. He put you under and put you in touch with your real self, and that was how he overcame a lot of your issues. It all sounded great to me. I'd been having trouble sleeping and was looking for some way to get the sleep I needed to function. My insomnia would sometimes last for days, and it was starting to affect my life. So, I made an appointment, and 2 weeks later I was lying on his couch, listening to Dr. McAllister count down from 10 as he put me in a suggestive trance. It was very sudden, like blinking, but everything changed after that trance. When I came out just as suddenly, Dr. McAllister looked strange, and I asked if something had happened. Strange may not be descriptive enough. He looked somehow enraptured, enlightened, utterly worshipful. You spoke to me about things you couldn't possibly have known. You talked to me about my childhood. You helped me get over the death of my mother. You helped me more in this hour-long session than I've ever helped anyone. I wasn't sure what he was talking about, but when he gripped my hand, his eyes shone like the lights of a zealot. I need more. Please let me put you back under, so I can discover more. I pulled away from him and took a huge step back. What the hell was he talking about? I had come here for help, but suddenly he wanted me to help him. I had to get out of here. I had to leave now. McAllister tried to stop me, but I was out the door before he could say much more than stop. I didn't sleep well that night either. It was becoming a real problem. Sometimes I would lay in bed and swear I heard whispers, but I put it off as auditory hallucinations. I hadn't slept well in the past 3 weeks, and I knew it was something that would catch up to me eventually. When I would force myself out of the house for work or to run errands, I could swear I felt someone watching me. What's more, I could swear I'd catch glimpses of someone from the corner of my eye, but they would always be gone when I turned to look at them. It never happened in my house, always when I was out and about, and the paranoia on top of the sleep deprivation was slowly eroding my sanity. So, when I heard someone open a window in my living room one night, I rolled over and just thought it was me having paranoid hallucinations. Turned out, it hadn't been a hallucination. When I heard someone open my bedroom door, I rolled over and found Dr. McAllister standing there watching me. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well either, and his eyes looked crazed as we stood staring at each other. I wasn't sure if he was real or not, but when he lunged at me, I curled into a ball and cried out for him to stop. He didn't attack me, though. He didn't hurt me at all, though now I wish he'd killed me right there. Instead, he just slipped a needle into my arm, and I watched his thumb push down the plunger as I felt a wave of warm and inviting sleep roll through me. I woke up in a finished basement, the lights turned down low, strapped to a chair as Dr. McAllister made sure my bindings were comfortable. I struggled, my limbs heavy and uncoordinated, but he held up a fresh needle and told me if I didn't calm down, he was going to put me out again. I made myself as still as I could, not sure what to expect here. This didn't seem to be a sexual thing. I was fully dressed, and the way he was tending to me almost felt worshipful. I didn't want it to come to this, but I can't live without the knowledge you possess. I know you don't believe what I'm saying, but while you were unconscious, you told me about things that may very well change my life. You spoke to me of things that opened my eyes, ideas I had never even conceived of, and the longer I went without hearing your voice again, the more I felt my newfound security crumbling. I'm sorry, I'm not usually like this, but I had to possess you, to have your knowledge, to understand your words. I can promise you that while you remain with me, you'll want for nothing. You are to me as a captured god that I wish to understand. We talked a lot that night, though I mostly yelled at him to let me go. In the end, though, he just injected me with something to knock me out, and I drifted off into a peaceful unconsciousness. And that was how I became Dr. McAllister's captive god. I will say that while I was with him, I never wanted for restful sleep. This was due in part to the fact that I spent most of my time in a near catatonic state. Dr. McAllister kept me restrained in a large underground area that I always thought of as the basement. I was seated in a large, comfortable chair, my hands secured to the arms with soft straps. There was a remote at hand, and I was allowed to watch anything I wanted on television, as long as the doctor was away. If I was hungry, all I had to do was push a button, and a short blonde woman, who I would later discover was the doctor's wife, would bring me anything I wanted. In the beginning, it really wasn't so bad. I was kept in a sluggish state from the drugs he used on me to induce the state that he wanted, but it wasn't bad. I watched TV, I ate, I existed. Given that I had worked 40-plus hours a week and lived off crappy food for most of my adult life, I felt almost like I was being pampered. I was free to relax. I could do almost anything, except leave or talk to people who were likely to wonder what had happened to me. My mom, my dad, my friends, I wondered if any of them wondered what had happened to me. It may seem odd to you that I never tried to escape, but my head was always in a cloud of some sort. The drugs left me just lucid enough to consume TV or audiobooks, but I never felt able to really settle my thoughts on anything in particular. I knew I should want to escape, but it was always a hard concept to catch hold of. Those days were the good days, back when Dr. McAllister was still operating his practice. That was when he was still pretending to have a normal life. He would come down in the evenings to talk with me, just telling me his problems and asking me to help. He would ask me about stocks or bonds, the housing market, business ideas, patents, inventions, and I would try my best to direct him in the way he wanted. I wasn't really sure what he wanted. My head was too foggy most of the time to make sense of it, but I would try my best to help him without the need to be placed in an unconscious state. We'd talk for hours about everything from the state of his marriage, the depraved childhood he had lived through, the future of psychology, and even the condition of his soul. I didn't always want to hear what he had to say, but I understood that it didn't really matter what I wanted. It didn't seem to make much of a difference anyway. We would talk for hours, but the end result was always a needle in my arm or my neck and several hours of blissful unconsciousness. I remember little from these periods of blackout, fortunately, but sometimes I would go to a dark place and just hang suspended in the murk. Things would whisper to me there, tell me things I couldn't understand. I was powerless to stop them. This happened very rarely, but it was still too often for my tastes. I don't know what I said to Dr. McAllister in those times, but there was always a drastic change when I came back to myself. It wasn't always for the better either. Once I came back to myself and felt something wet in my lap. I glanced down, which was difficult because my head was strapped to the headrest, and found that someone had thrown a head into my lap. I flinched away from it as my groggy brain finally clicked it all together, but it was little more than a shudder in my current state. The head had wispy gray hair, a pair of broken glasses hanging across the face from one ear, and a nose full of broken veins from a lifetime of drinking. I didn't recognize it, but as it soaked the pants of my pajamas, I did feel like it was familiar somehow. Dr. McAllister was sitting across from me, looking expectantly at the gift he had literally dropped in my lap, and I looked at it with confusion as I asked why he had done this. You told me to. You said if I meant to truly get over the cruelty and abuse that my father had given me, then I had to destroy the icon of my father within myself. So I did. I told him that I wanted to meet so we could discuss our past and reconcile. He was ecstatic. He hadn't seen me in 20 years, and oh, did we reconcile. I waited for him to turn around, and I bashed his head in with a hammer, choking him to death as he lay twitching on the floor. Then I took the body and disposed of it, cutting the head off so I could show you that I'd followed your instructions. You're so wise, so correct. I am your loyal disciple, always. I started screaming, mindless, gibbering noise, but he just bowed to me, and when the head hit the ground next to him, he didn't even flinch. That was my first inclination that the things I was saying in my sleep might be used in this way, in ways that I had never considered. After that, he started bringing people down to see me. At first, it was his wife, the blonde woman who'd been feeding me. She looked skeptical as she approached, content to keep her husband's secrets, but unsure of joining him in this new experiment. I knew from our talks that he was afraid she would leave him, but enjoyed the financial stability of their marriage. He stuck me with the needle as she sat a few feet away, and when I came to, she was bowing and crying and thanking me for helping her see the truth. My husband was right. You are truly a god. I was wrong to ever doubt you, or him. After that, it was friends and colleagues. They all seemed confused when he introduced them to me, calling me his god of knowledge, and some of them laughed, thinking it was a joke. They would sit and talk to me, listening to my answers, and looking at McAllister as if to ask if this were an elaborate prank. In the end, though, when I came back from the little nap he would subject me to, it was always the same. Their smirks of disbelief or scowls of confusion were replaced with rapturous awe, and they would pledge their undying fealty to me. No matter how many of them I begged to release me, the outcome was always the same. A religion of sorts began to form. Over time, McAllister drew in his cult. It was only a few at first, 5, 10, but it quickly grew into a sizable little flock. The followers began to take care of me, washing and feeding and seeing to my every whim, except the most important. I would ask them to release me, beg them to let me go, but it was always interpreted as a test of some sort. Their god was testing them to see if they were loyal to the here or to the hereafter, and they would thank me for helping them fortify their belief in me as they slid my hands back into the restraints or pushed my head back into the buckles. I yelled at them. I called them idiots. I tried to push them, but the constant use of sedatives and the lack of any regular exercise had made me weak. I wasn't wasting away, but I wasn't getting the exercise I needed to be certain. I could do little to free myself. My bonds always replaced, and after a while I just gave in. The funny thing was that whatever I was telling them while I was under was working. McAllister showed me the money he had made, earned from the stock market and selling property, and the cult began to thrive. What's more, they all claimed to have cast off whatever addictions or mental health problems or childhood traumas had plagued them, and they were addicted now to nothing but serving me. Like McAllister had said, those who tried to leave or to return to their lives reported feeling hopeless and manic unless they could return to my presence and hear my words, whatever they were. That's when things started to get bad. McAllister was truly addicted to my influence, and it led him to overstep. McAllister had been gathering his followers at his home, and while it was large, it was becoming too small to hold all of them. I can't really speculate how many there were, but the basement was standing room only. I sat beneath a small bar that he was standing on, and the sea of bodies was dizzying. Though he was speaking, they all looked at me as if I were speaking through him. So many eyes looking at me. My body still held in the chair I had sat in for God knew how long, was something I never quite got used to. It never made me feel like a deity. It never made me feel powerful to have them worship me. It always made me feel like a pet, my freedom just one open door away. McAllister said they'd be moving to a new place soon, a place that would house them all comfortably. They could all stay there indefinitely, leaving their jobs and lives behind so they could care for their captive god. He didn't say where it was, but he said they would all go this afternoon and prepare for a long journey. They were all so happy, their faces enraptured as he told them about their new home. But I began to feel that this would never end. When he began to bring people to see me, I had hoped that someone would fail to see me as he did and get me out of here. They would take me away from him. They would call the police, and I would be saved from my captivity. That never happened. Whatever power I had held them in sway, and after a while I doubted that I would ever get out of here. I didn't know how long I had been McAllister's captive god, but I knew that no matter how comfortable the life, this had to end. I decided then that if they weren't going to get me out, I would have to do it myself. Strangely, my chance came that very day. They had all left me so they could prepare, and as I sat in the shadowy basement, I realized that my wrist strap was undone. This had never happened before. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to do. It took all the energy I had to focus enough to get my hand to undo the other strap. And when I bent down to undo my legs, the effort seemed to take years. My mind was like unraveling yarn, and it was hard to focus on any particular task. When the bonds came off my legs, I got shakily to my feet before bending to rub some life into them. They were prickly from the lack of use, and I took shaky steps as I made for the stairs. I got to the top before I was discovered. I peeked through the door and into the barren kitchen beyond. The cupboards were empty, the countertops clean, and I could tell that this room had already been cleaned out for the move. I had just decided to take a step out and make for the back door when someone walked into the kitchen and saw me. They called for McAllister, walking to me as they insisted I return to my chair. I pushed at them, telling them to get away from me, to get out of my way, but as I lunged for the back door, I heard others coming in to stop me. I made it to the backyard, squinting at the sun as it hit my eyes, but I found it fenced with tall wooden boards. I was grabbed by many hands, and when someone slipped a needle into my neck, I looked back to see McAllister instruct them to get me in the car. I came to some time later, and I was laying in an elaborate bed, my hands cuffed to the frame. That began the worst part of my confinement, though it was thankfully the end of it. After that, the drugging became worse. McAllister and his inner circle kept me in a near constant catatonic state. The drugs he used were no longer just injected, and they began to experiment with other substances. The documents that were found later said they received different outcomes when different kinds of drugs were used, and they often sat around and drank or laughed as I came in and out of reality. I was aware of nothing in those times. A ship drifting on a sea of time. I could have been with them for days. I could have spent decades under their control. But to me, time was only islands glimpsed from afar. I didn't see many people in that time, just the 5 or so who were in McAllister's inner circle. But these men always spoke as if they were doing very well. Often there was cigar smoke around my bed, the smell of expensive liquor, and always the low murmur of talk as they waited for me to tell them what else they might do to gain more power. I'd become their oracle, their captive god as opposed to their revered deity, and they threatened to use me up. These are the times I remember the least about, except for the end. I spent a lot of my days in a black stupor, and the more they experimented, the more often I was back in the dark place. When I came back from these trances, I noticed a change in my captors. Gone were the shining eyes of the enraptured. Disappeared were the weeping orbs of the enlightened. They were replaced by the flinty eyes of the zealot, and I was afraid that he might break his promise. He looked angry, but also resolved. Whatever I had told him weighed heavily on him, but I wouldn't understand the burden, not for a while yet. Not until the day it all came to an end. I came to one afternoon to find an intrusive light leaking into my dark chamber. They had always kept me in this persistent dark room, but now the door was open, and something was laying in it. On the floor, there were others, none of them moving, and I was confused by their sudden stillness. Was this something new? Were they sleeping, or were they... I tried to put that thought out of my head. They couldn't be dead, I reminded myself as I shook my chains. If they were all dead, then who would free me so I didn't die here too? I did as you said, came a monotone voice, and I jumped as I realized that one of the slumped forms had only been praying. It was McAllister. He looked wild. His salt and pepper hair was sticking up at odd angles, and his face was splattered with blood. His shirt was soaked in something as it hung on him like a wet sack. He appeared to be praying, but as something clinked in his shaky hands, I saw that he held a gun. I was afraid that he would shoot me too for half a second, but as he put it under his chin, I became even more afraid that he would use it on himself. I have risen as high as I can. Your will dictates that I must shed my vehicle to rise any higher. I shall see you on the other side. His blood made a crimson line across my face as the gun went off. And suddenly, my fears were realized. I was alone. Luckily for me, someone heard the gunshot. I would lay in that bed for 2 days before the FBI came to investigate the compound. Turned out they'd been keeping an eye on McAllister for quite some time, ever since he had started gathering followers at his home. After 2 years in his new compound, they had begun to try to prepare a case against him, before he woke up one morning and decided to put an end to his little flock. With the help of his wife, they had poisoned the morning meal, and McAllister had drawn his inner circle to a meeting before breakfast. That's where he shot them, as they sat listening to my latest ramblings. They had found journals that claimed there were things I had told them, but after interviewing me, I think they decided that he was out of his mind. At least, That's what Agent Maxit led me to believe. We're going to have to hold you as a person of interest, but it honestly sounds like you were an unwilling participant. I'm going to go and get some things in order. Have a seat. We'll make some accommodations for you." After he left, I noticed the recorder sitting on the table. It wasn't running, which I had expected, and when I reached for it, I saw the tape inside had a date on it that I remembered. It was the date of my first session with Dr. McAllister. Couldn't imagine a reason behind the FBI having a tape with that date on it, unless McAllister had recorded it for some reason. I put the recorder back down, trying to stop my curiosity before it could take root. I had never heard what I sounded like in that state that seemed to enrapture the old doctor so much. What had I said to him to make him throw his whole life away in the pursuit of it? I couldn't help myself. I hit play on the recorder and listened as McAllister told me to be calm and began to count down from 10. It wasn't the jagged, often flighty voice I remembered from any time after his session. This was McAllister at his most sane, and as he came to 1, I heard him gasp and ask what I was doing. From the recording, I heard a slightly deeper version of my own voice, and it filled me with dread. "Agent Maxit has been listening to the tapes. He's becoming as unstable as the good doctor. If you don't escape now, I fear that he'll have you just like McAllister did. You'll have to be quick, and you'll have to be smart. But if you mean to be free, you need to find a way out of here. Good luck." Have you ever had a dream, maybe a memory from your childhood, so vivid that it almost has to be real? I'm not sure if this actually happened or not, but I've dreamed about it for the last 2 weeks, and I'm terrified that it will never stop. Whenever I close my eyes, it begins again, and each time, it's more vivid than the last. This isn't normal for me. Most days I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, much less every detail of the dreams I had last night. But I can tell you every single detail of this event as though it happened just a second ago. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever seen in my 30 years of life. And if it doesn't stop soon, I don't know what I'll do. I was 8 years old when I knew what terror really was. Miss Winkler was teaching us math, her blackboard covered in numbers and mathematical symbols, when my hand came up, my chubby fingers tickling the sky in anticipation. She'd been trying to engage us for about 45 minutes, enticing slivers of answers out of kids who'd rather be playing outside or pretending to be Power Rangers. When my hand came up, she looked so hopeful. Maybe she thought she had finally reached a student, perhaps. Maybe she thought she'd finally had a breakthrough, and a student would begin to return her answers to her. When she called on me, I can still see the hopeful smile that stretched her painted lips as she said my name with great expectation. Unfortunately, I was about to break her heart. "Can I go to the bathroom, Miss Winkler?" I asked in my high, innocent voice. Her face fell, and as an adult, I can understand that disappointment. "Yes, take the hall pass when you go." The hall pass was a ruler with the word "hall pass" written on it in magic marker. It was smudged from many dirty hands, and as I took it up and left the room, my adult mind wondered how many other hands had touched it over the years. As a kid, all I had wondered about was whether or not I could use it as a convincing lightsaber. I suppose kids do have different priorities, don't they? I swished and buzzed it all the way to the bathroom, and as I came up to the squat little building, I felt nothing besides a need to pee. The brick building was large enough to hold 2 bathrooms, a boys' and a girls', and 4 students comfortably inside each. I remember it being cold and damp in the winter, but I thought it would be mercifully cool on this blistering summer day. As I pushed the door open, I felt cold air ruffle my hair. Today, though, something didn't feel quite right about this place. The darkness was oppressive, pervasive, and even as a child I could feel that something was different. I reached inside and groped for the light switch. My hand slid over the slimy walls but found nothing. I knew there should be a light switch here, but as I scrambled my hand over the moist tiles, I became more and more aware of how badly I needed to pee. I finally decided to just go use the stall in the dark, the dingy windows letting in enough light that I wouldn't be in complete darkness. The door swung shut behind me. I felt the air pull it closed very hard, and the sound echoed off the bathroom walls. The dingy windows showed me 2 urinals and 2 walled-off toilet stalls. I went into one of the stalls, always feeling more comfortable sitting down to use the bathroom, and got comfortable as my bladder began to empty itself. As I started to do my business, I became aware of the strange noise from the stall next to me. The stalls were made of concrete blocks, painted glossy white, but they were not entirely built into the floor. There was a small opening at the bottom, about a foot high, where you could see into the stall next door. As I sat in the greasy semi-light, I heard the sound like mud dripping onto the floor. Every 5 seconds, it would glop, glop, glop onto the floor. Underneath the sound was another, softer, wetter, heavy breathing that was so low it was almost inaudible. I had finished using the bathroom by this point, but the sound mesmerized me. I had never heard anything like it, and I was fascinated and terrified to see what made a sound like that. Slowly I bent down so I could look under the wall, too afraid to simply go open the stall and see what was in there. As my knees bent to the cold concrete and my hands splayed over the rough floor, I brought my eyes down to peek and saw something that I will never forget. If it was dingy dark in my stall, then it was nearly pitch black in the other. As my eyes adjusted, I could see something on the other side that looked like nothing so much as rippling mud or swaying pudding. It was a mass, a wiggling mass of something that nearly blocked out the entire opening. As I watched, it rippled and shook endlessly as the sound of wet, labored breathing only got louder. Before long, it was more than background noise. It covered the dripping gloop with its damp and difficult chorus. I couldn't look away. I couldn't drag myself away from it until something round and angry floated through the muck and seemed to see me seeing it. It was an eye. I was up in a heartbeat, legs drawn up to my chest as I sat on the toilet and clutched myself. I held the ruler to my chest like a makeshift weapon and tried to silence my growing terror as the breathing became growly and agitated. The door burst open on the other stall, and I thanked my lucky stars that I had remembered to lock the door to my own cubicle before starting my business. Whatever was on the other side banged against the door. It sounded like waves crashing against a levee, and all I could do was cower and try not to scream, worried it might excite the creature and push it to further violence. It slammed in again and again, and as it did, I almost thought I could feel flecks of whatever it was made of slapping off and splatting on the ceiling and floor. It battered the door mercilessly, and to my horror, I could see the simple slide lock joggling and shuddering under every blow. The sound it made was like a mudslide, like mud pushing its way through a hallway during a flood, and I just knew that any minute it would break the door and cover me. Then, it stopped. Whatever it was gave one final slap against the door, and then rumbled off out of the bathroom. I sat petrified, unable to move for nearly 5 minutes, before I finally found myself able to control my shaking legs. It was gone. Whatever it was gone, but I wanted it to be gone and well gone before I decided to come out. The lock didn't want to open, but it popped open after a few hard slaps with my hand. The door creaked outward on warped hinges, and I could tell that the cubicle door was definitely going to need replacing. As I turned to look at it, I could see several dark stains on the outside where something had slammed its soupy body into it again and again. Something dripped onto my shoulder, and my scream peeled off the walls like a startled bird. I scuttled back on crab legs. My knees had buckled, and I watched as something thick and muddy dripped off the ceiling and fell onto the cracked tile. I looked up to see a dozen or more little stalagmites, or maybe they were stalactites, hanging from the ceiling. They oozed and threatened to fall, their creation having taken place very recently. At that moment, all I wanted to do was get out, to escape, but I should have known that it wouldn't be that easy. When I pushed the door open, it didn't swing out onto the yellowing grass of my school sports field, but onto a shadowy hellscape of swirling lights and acrid smells. My child's mind didn't understand everything, didn't even understand some of the things, but it did understand that there were many moving mountains out there that made the one in the bathroom look like an anthill. The smaller ones congregated around towering fires, the dusty brown earth scraped shiny by their passing, and around them seemed to grind mountains that towered up into the greasy sky. Their tops were illuminated by infrequent forks of lightning. I could see towering rock sentinels made of ever-flowing viscous earth. It was too much. I closed the door and crumpled into a corner between the dripping sink and the wall. I made myself as small as possible. I felt as a bug must feel when it's surrounded by humans, and as my mind tried to process what I had seen, I seemed on the verge of breaking. How could I process something so big without going insane? The smallest of them had been barely able to be contained by this building. The largest of them could have destroyed this building without thinking. My mind could not fathom the sheer size of them, the knowledge of these moving mountains, so I did the only thing I could to keep myself from going insane. I put myself to sleep. The janitor found me there, and when he touched my shoulder, he said I fought and screamed like a cornered animal. He didn't mind, though. He was glad he had found me. It was night when he took me out of the little toilet building, and he had to be very firm with me to get me to go outside into the gloom. I was afraid it was a trick. The dark reminded me of the greasy blackness of that place, and it wasn't until my mother saw us coming out and ran to me that I knew I was back where I belonged. They took me to the principal's office. My dad, my teacher, the principal, the police officers, they were all waiting there for me. My dad hugged me, folding me into his warm embrace, and my teachers and principals asked me where I had been. When the janitor said he had found me in the toilet, my teacher seemed confused, and the police seemed aggravated. "You said you searched the entire school," said the principal, not just to my teacher, but also to the police officers. "We did. We even brought the dogs in. There's no way that kid's been in the bathroom for 2 days. My face must have shown how confused I was as I tried my best to follow the explanation. They told me I'd been missing for 2 days. The school had been searched, a code Adam had been ongoing, and they had searched every place I liked and every friend's house I'd ever been to. I tried to tell them about the monsters, about the weird world full of giant things, but they just shook their heads and said I must have been hiding this whole time. I think my parents were just happy that I was safe, and the principal didn't punish me, even though I sensed that he really wanted to. I think my teacher believed me when I told her I wasn't hiding, holding the hall pass out to her in a shaky hand. She knew I was a good kid, and didn't usually cause more than the average 8-year-old's amount of trouble. She quit the next year, and I was removed from her class at my parents' request. When she saw me in the halls after that, I could swear that she looked almost sad to see me. I haven't thought about that place in years. After it happened, my parents took me to see a psychiatrist, and she helped me put it out of my mind. I would only remember it sometimes in the dark hours of the night, but it was gone just as quickly, even though it comes back in vivid detail, and I don't know how much longer I can handle it. I see the mountains moving as I stand in the doorway of that bathroom. I know that they will end me if they see me. I know that if they see a way to our world, they will end all of us, and I'm afraid of what I'll see the next time I open that door. When I stepped into the little room, I thought I had come to the wrong place. I have AOADD, Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder. If that sounds made up, it's because it's pretty rare, from what I understand. Most people get ADD when they're kids, but very few of them are diagnosed once they're my age. In fact, it's something like 1% of people, from what I understand. When I was a kid, I was never prone to any of the hyperactivity or attention problems that my peers had. I never needed medication or structure to help me pay attention while I was in class. I did really well in school and did really well in my working life, right up until I was about 34. Then suddenly, I had the hardest time paying attention. I couldn't focus on much of anything, not even for the short term. I would find my mind wandering while I was at work, and eventually, I got fired. I couldn't concentrate long enough on my work to get anything done. I tried to find another job, but anything I managed to get ended the same way. I couldn't even pay attention long enough to flip hamburgers, and my resume was soon in shambles. At home, I struggled to relate to my family. Television shows, sporting events, the day-to-day things no longer held my attention. I was aware of this, aware that I was losing my wife and kids, but I couldn't pay attention to that either. It was like being trapped just behind your eyes and having to watch as you lose everything. After my wife left and took the kids, I decided it might be time to go see a doctor. This was a little different than just the general malaise that I sometimes found with life, and I needed help. My doctor told me about the adult onset attention deficit disorder and prescribed medication and some supplements. He helped me fill out the paperwork and get on disability. The disability paid for my housing. My wife had taken our house in the divorce, and the disability made them go easy on me when it came to child support. I wasn't just a lazy slob, I had a medical condition, and I was trying to overcome it. None of the medication worked, the supplements either, and nothing they suggested seemed to help with my attention problems. After a while, my doctor recommended a support group, and I told him I'd give it a try. When I came to my first session, I wasn't sure that I had made the right call. The meeting room was covered with pictures of a man, hand drawings, and police sketches, all of them with the caption, "Have you seen this man?" I wondered who he was, the whole thing feeling a bit tinfoil hattish, but I had to admit that the man looked a little familiar. I was still staring at him when the organizer called me out, looking up when the man asked if I had AOADD. When I told him I did, he nodded and told me I was in the right place. So I took a seat with the other 5 or 6 people there and decided to give it a try. "So, why don't you tell us about your trigger moment?" "My what?" I asked, not sure what he was talking about. "Your trigger moment. Everyone in the group has one. It's the moment you realize that you had a problem with attention. It'll sound a little weird, but it may surprise you to learn that a lot of our trigger moments are very similar." I thought about it, like really racking my brain, but I couldn't come up with much of anything. My doctor had never said anything about a trigger moment, and this was something new. My attention issues had just kind of happened, and I couldn't think of anything that had caused it. The man leading the meetings, a middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair, nodded and said that was normal. "Charlie," he said, looking at a bearded guy who was dressed like somebody's dad at an amusement park, "why don't you talk about your trigger moment? Maybe it'll help him figure it out." Charlie nodded, interlocking his fingers as he put them across his lap. "I was walking down Main Street when a man suddenly called out to me from a nearby park bench. He asked if I would mind giving him my attention, just like that, and I nodded, saying I would. I figured he just wanted money. Most of the guys that call out to you from park benches want money. But after I agreed to give him my attention, he nodded and just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird, wondered what the hell that had been about, but as I walked, I realized I couldn't focus on the fantasy football team I had been planning. I'd been thinking about the game coming up. I was really big into fantasy football back then, and the team I had put together was doing really well. I had been going over my roster for next week. My team was about to go into the semifinals, and it was weird to realize that the roster would no longer hold my attention. I just kind of wandered around, not really thinking about anything in particular. And that's how it started. After that, I couldn't really pay attention to anything. I lost my job, I lost my girlfriend, and now I just kind of float around most of the time. That trigger moment, the moment in time when I met the man, seems to be the only thing I can really concentrate on anymore. I can remember it with crystal clarity, but everything else is like catching water in a sieve. I can think about something for a moment or two, maybe even for as long as a half an hour, but eventually, it's gone. I live out of a van now. You might have seen it when you pulled up to the rec center, and I only have it because the guy took my money and handed me the keys, and I didn't have to sign anything. It's not registered. The cops have ticketed me 12 times or more, and it's only a matter of time before they take that too, I guess. The group nodded at him like this was the most normal thing they had ever heard, and when they all looked at me expectantly, as if I had my own story to tell. I just shook my head. There was something, though, a tickling in the back of my mind, but nothing yet. "Melissa, why don't you go next?" He never asked a question, never asked people if they wanted to share, and all of his statements were just that. He wasn't asking them if they wanted to put their story out there. He was telling them that it was time to share information. I was working as a waitress at a lunch counter. It was the middle of the day, the lunch rush was in full swing, and I barely even looked at the guy when he came and sat down at the counter. I walked over and asked if I could get him something. He said all he wanted was my attention, just a little attention. When I said he had it, he just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird. The guy had wanted my attention and then he left, but that was how it started. I'm not quite as bad as some of the people in the group. I can still hold on to my attention for about 40% of the time. Sometimes, however, I'll just lose all ability to pay attention to anything. My doctor recommended this group, thinking it might stop it from getting worse, but I think it's as bad as it'll ever get. After all, the man only asked for a little of my attention, not all of it. I stopped her after that, asking if she was serious. She said she was, and I looked at the group organizer with a raised eyebrow. Are you trying to tell me that these two had their attention stolen by, what, some kind of demon or something? The organizer shook his head emphatically. No, not a demon. I don't believe in heaven or hell, but I do believe in this man and what he's doing. I don't know what he is, some highly persuasive psychic, some kind of creature from outside our reality, or just some Orwellian thought criminal who's figured out how to perpetrate the worst crime imaginable. But he is the string that holds everyone together, and he seems to like this area the best. I got up, meaning to leave, but the organizer stopped me with a few words. You met him too, didn't you? I had my hand on the door, but his statement had made me think again about where I had seen the man on the poster. I saw you recognizing him when you came in. Everyone does, but they don't always remember right away. He's sneaky, a very easy-to-miss man. He's so unassuming that you never think twice about giving him your attention. It's just a turn of phrase, after all. May I have your attention, please? But he means it literally. They never realize what they're giving up when they agree to give him their attention, but he knows full well what he's taking. I was still at the door, my hand around the knob. Even though I didn't believe what he was saying, I couldn't deny one thing. I did recognize the man in the picture. I just couldn't remember where. Larry, why don't you tell your story next? You should have a seat and listen. Larry has a real harrowing tale. I took my seat, curiosity getting the better of me, and looked at Larry as he looked at his cheap Walmart shoes instead of the group. Larry reminded me of the dad from The Honeymooners, an older guy in the comfortable overweight of age. His head was bald, except for a scattering of peach fuzz on top, and I noticed there was a long scar on his left arm that he kept covered with the sleeve of his shirt. There was enough sleeve to do the job. He was wearing a sweatshirt even in the unseasonable heat, but he seemed inadvertently to pluck at it. It was as if the scar itched him, and he needed to scratch it. I was a bus driver for the city. I've been a bus driver for 25 years. I knew my job, I knew my route, and if I'd been a little luckier, I was only about 5 years away from a really good retirement. I was taking on afternoon fares, greeting people as they put in their change and coins in the little slot. When he got on, I told him it was $1.50 to ride the bus, and it was change only. He asked me something, and at the time, I thought he had asked if I had a quarter. Sometimes they didn't have enough, and they asked if they could borrow a quarter or a dime. I told him sure, digging around in my pockets to see if I had some change. But when I looked up with a couple of dimes, the guy was gone. I didn't think anything of it, just slapped the change in the box and got on my way. As I drove, however, I found my attention waning. I couldn't really focus on any one particular thing. I was just looking everywhere, having trouble remembering what I'd been doing. I crashed that bus into rush hour traffic, causing one of the biggest accidents in the city's memory at the time. There were no fatalities, thankfully, but there was enough property damage and medical expenses that the city had little choice but to fire me. I got a portion of my retirement, but nowhere near what I would have got after retiring with the full 30. I feel terrible for what I did, but even that seems to be dulled by the fact that I can't seem to pay attention to anything for more than a few minutes. I have to write down these meetings on a whiteboard so I can even remember that I have to go to them at all. If it wasn't for Kay here, calling us on meeting days and coming to pick us up, most of us wouldn't be here at all. Kay, the organizer, looked back at me and seemed to be inviting me to tell my own story. I still couldn't remember all the details, but something was starting to come back as I listened to them tell their stories. I had been going to get coffee for my boss and some of my friends in the office. They had given me their order, and I had gone to Keeger Coffee to get some Joe. I had been coming back with the cardboard container of coffee, the one for me, balanced in my other hand, when someone had asked if they could have my attention, please. I turned, looking at the guy as he stood on a box with a small crowd gathered around him. It wasn't many, maybe 5 or 6 people, including me, but as he asked the question again, a few of them nodded. I found myself nodding along with them. Kay was right. The question was so harmless that I hadn't thought twice about agreeing to it. It seemed that even a nod was good enough. After 3 or 4 of the people had nodded and stepped in closer, he clapped his hands and stepped down off the box. Then, to the general confusion of the crowd, he simply walked away. Looking at the group again, I realized that one of the people from the crowd was sitting there, and they seemed to have remembered me as well. He was on a street corner, a guy standing on a soapbox. He called for everyone's attention, and a few of us gave it to him. I walked off after he left, not thinking anything of it, but that was when it all started. The guy I'd recognized from the crowd was nodding along, looking around as if to show people that he wasn't crazy. Kay was nodding too, and when he spread his hands out, everyone grasped hands, and I found myself joining them. Kay clearly was no victim of the man, and I wondered what his connection was to all this as he reaffirmed to all of us that we were okay, and that it was going to get better. I'm glad that you remembered the man and the moment you lost your attention to him. When I started this group 3 years ago, with Larry there, I knew there would be others. I want to help, I want to heal, and I want to be here for all of you in your time of need. There were nods, some of them thanking him, but I was still curious as to why. Why? If he hasn't affected you, then why do you care? I said, as all of them looked at me. Kay nodded, having expected this. Though I still have my attention, I can assure you that I too have been affected by this man. My father lost his attention to him, you see, about 25 years ago, when I was just a freshman in high school. My father accidentally gave his attention to this man as he stood at a bus stop a few blocks from here. He told anyone who would listen about the man, who had only asked for his attention, screamed it from his bed in the mental hospital, but no one believed him. No one besides me, that is. I've been looking for evidence for years, something to justify my father's stories. And the more of you that I find, the more evidence I get of the man and his existence. I'm so proud of you, of all of you, for being brave enough to come here today and share your stories. They all started to clap, but I didn't join in. So what do we do now? I asked, as the applause died down. Kay cocked a head at me. What do you mean? I mean, if we know this man is stealing our attention, then why don't we find him and get it back? The others shook their heads, and I realized I probably wasn't the first person to think of that. Kay sat back, shaking his head morosely, and told me to put the idea out of my mind. But why? We can find him. You said he likes to hunt in this area, so why don't we just go after him? because no one who tries ever finds him, or they never come back. They either fail to find him and go crazy trying to get back what they lost, or they find him and he does something to them. Maybe having their attention gives him some kind of power over them. Maybe he just does something worse to them. No one knows. This group is a safe place, a support group for those who are suffering from what he did to them. I never wanted to see anyone else live the way my father did, strapped to a hospital bed so he wouldn't wander off and hurt himself. I help people who have been hurt by the man, helping them lead a normal life. Well, as normal a life as they can. I feel that it's my sacred duty to help people, to try and get something back after what he's taken from them. But there's no getting back what he's taken. I hope you'll join us in that. There is, after all, safety in numbers. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, and as I said my goodbyes and watched Kay pack up the snacks, I covertly took one of the photos off the wall. I know he said that once I remembered, the memory would be crystal clear, but I didn't want to risk forgetting what this guy looked like. I can't share in Kay's optimism, and I can't stand by and do nothing if this man is the one who has affected my life in such a way. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens to me. I'll tattoo it on the back of my hand if I have to, so I can force myself to concentrate anytime I begin to slip. I will find this man, this strange creature who steals what is most important to us, and I will have my attention back, or die trying.